Hi. In this episode of the Lightcast, we're here to talk about some time travel stuff. Specifically, I wanted to talk about something I've been planning to try to make a video for a while now about, and I just could not do it because of a few reasons. And we're going to get into that. So instead, I want to cover my thoughts and my findings here because I feel like this is a really good format for the topic in general. So, with that said, let's take a look. One of the reasons that I've chosen to do this in podcast format or like cast episode format, whatever, um, as opposed to a video is primarily because I have a super high bar for proof and evidence. If you've seen any of my videos, you know that I try to collect as much as I can. And in this case, there's just not a way to really prove that what I'm about to propose happened, at least not without official confirmation that that's the case. What I'm going to tell you is essentially what my theory was for the paradox of the wilds. The reason why I wouldn't call it a theory is because of the fact that it's really unprovable. It's completely unprovable. The evidence just isn't strong enough to actually prove it. But I think I'm going to provide some logical deductions with this that may pique your interest. So I want to share it. So essentially, what I think is going on in the entire era of the wilds is the result of be known as a stable time loop, where history can repeat itself inside of a time loop because of factors, such as a person recreating the events without it being in completely a bootstrap paradox. And a key thing about stable time loops is that it is actually possible for them to continue to execute over and over and over again without the people who are inside of the loop really being any of the wiser. And the reason why I side on the idea of it being a stable time loop as opposed to a bootstrap paradox, we're going to talk about that. But there are a lot of signs. So a key, I guess we'll say a feature of a stable time loop, there are a couple of them. Proliferation of information where a person has a piece of information about something that not everybody else seems to have, or that people don't remember, that somebody else remembers. Things appearing when they shouldn't, such as they call this like temporal residue in concept. And essentially what temporal residue really is something appearing inside of another thing. It is slightly different than what convergence is. Convergence would be like the meeting of two rivers, where temporal residue being left behind would be like a boulder appearing inside of a mountain randomly. You also have the presence of what is known as a perfect predictor. This is the person who predicts the future with a startling level of accuracy, especially in cases where it defies reason. And then, of course, you can also have things that do exist or did exist that people have memories of that disappears completely. There are a lot of really interesting things that happen in the lead up to Breath of the Wild. These things can be learned in-game and also through Masterworks, Breath of the Wild Masterworks. And they paint a really, really interesting picture. For example, just to get started, the royal family had lost track of the Master Sword leading up to the events of Breath of the Wild. Nobody actually knows how Link acquired the Master Sword at the age of 12 or 13, but he did. The first time that I read this, I thought that it was a localization error, and I ended up going back to a Japanese copy of Masterworks as opposed to Creating His Champion, and then found that, yes, indeed, it does say the same thing. And I found that really interesting. Mind you, to wield the Master Sword, you must be of a certain amount of power. And when you start the Breath of the Wild, it takes time for you to build up that power to get the sword, right? This would suppose that for him to have pulled the Master Sword at 12 or 13, he would have needed to be at a certain amount of power at that point. And this is before he became a knight or anything. And he was pretty powerful according to the descriptions. No disputing that. But I cannot believe that he would be powerful enough to pull the Master Sword. So I believe he acquired it through other means. What those are, I don't know. If you follow the background lore of A Link to the Past, for example, I don't think this is exclusive to A Link to the Past. I am just referencing it because it's really interesting lore, which is that the hero who would quash and prevent the prophecy of the calamity from coming true is said to be a hero that is descended from a line of knights. So maybe it was just passed down by his family. I don't know. But I thought it was really interesting that they called out the fact that they wanted to say that nobody knew the whereabouts and nobody knows how he acquired it. So that's one. Another one would be the fortune teller that told King Rome about the return of the calamity. Nobody knows who that person was. It's only known that it wasn't Zelda or her mother. And I think that there can be some explanations for this. It's very clear to me that the Sheikah were tracking lunar cycles. Obviously, lunar cycles are in some way tied to Gan, right? So I haven't ruled out that it could be Impa. But that's also, it's very strange because it's like if it was somebody that was more broadly known, I'm surprised that the information wouldn't be more available for that. So this person predicts the return of the calamity. And then, of course, when you actually get into the game and start playing it, the Sheikah monks all have, they speak about their prophecies. And I won't say that it's either in game or it is in Breath of the Wild Masterworks that it's mentioned that the prophecies are said to have been given to them directly by the goddess. What that means, I have no idea. Like, they literally goddess or goddess reincarnate, no idea. But that's what they say. And then when you think about what the things that they actually say, these monks have been in this place supposedly for a very long time. And then they say things like, from the ashes of Hyrule rises a hero or whatever. And they couldn't possibly known that because the last time that the calamity was faced 10,000 years ago, they were all victorious. The Sheikah weren't, of course, but the rest of them were. And it's very, very strange, like they predicted it perfectly. So that's two perfect predictions and unexplained sword showing up. And then I want to get into something that was a revelation from Zelda Notes, which was about the Shrine of Resurrection and how it was built in preparation for the 10,000 years ago calamity. And then, after the defeat of the calamity at the end of Breath of the Wild, it seems to be the case that the Sheikah tech, including the Shrine of Resurrection, disappeared into dust, as Zelda Notes says. Obviously, not all the tech disappeared, but enough of it did. So, that would mean that they built the Shrine of Resurrection and all these other things before the last time this happened, but they didn't disappear that time and then they disappeared this time, which is also a whole other level of accuracy that is really, really fascinating, that they somehow knew that the exact things that would be needed in the future. Let's hop into the prologue of Tears of the Kingdom, where Sally Link wake Ganon up from a very long slumber, and he knows their names. Now, on screen at that point, and all throughout Breath of the Wild, we have no sign, beyond a few circumstantial things like what I've mentioned, that there's any time travel at this point. Nobody is any of the wiser, and yet he still knows their name. This is what I think most people will point to whenever they talk about the bootstrap paradox thing with Tears of the Kingdom. Because in a bootstrap paradox, you essentially have like something that is the result of something that has an unknown origin, and it just continues in a loop. And it doesn't have to continue, sorry. But it's in a thing with an unknown origin, something that a person couldn't know, but that later on you find out that by going out of the past, it actually creates the events to make it happen. The Song of Storms and Ocarina of Time is a super great example of this if you've never played that. Basically, in the future, you end up, through a chain of events, you actually help incept the Song of Storms, and then slowly drive a person crazy in the process. And the reason why I don't feel like a bootstrap paradox quite right here is because there's certain precipitating factors that would have had to have happened for Ganon to know their names. For example, Ganon learns Link's name from the Remember the Name speech. So that would mean that had to happen, which would mean that Zelda had to go into the past and cause this to happen. And it doesn't quite, that doesn't quite add up, because we can discern with some of these other clues that something must have happened in the lead up to even the first game in this era. Anyhow, we all know how the prologue plays out if you played it. Zelda falls down into a pit, and in the process is transported back into the past, and for some strange reason, a few kilometers south. In a true bootstrap paradox, what I would have expected to see in that situation was that they still didn't know where the Master Sword was, because part of the chain of events that leads Zelda to Drakomify is because the Master Sword going through time was actually a signal to her. And it directly leads to her making that decision and then talking to Minoru and then actually Drakonifying. And clearly, we don't have a Dragon Zelda in Breath of the Wild, or even, of all the tales of dragons that are mentioned, Zelda as the Light Dragon looks very specific. I think it's for that reason that Link has the Master Sword that I don't feel like a bootstrap paradox works here, because I would expect it to play out the same. A stable time loop, which would be kind of like a cousin to this, could explain this to you, like that this situation could have played out slightly different but still led to the same effects in the end, the same net effects. And I started thinking about this logically, because if you watch the prologue of this game, there is something we know for certain in that moment. Something or someone has traveled to the past at least once, at minimum. And from the perspective of at least once, I started to try to think about what kinds of things would lead for this to happen, but play out in the way like what we saw in Breath of the Wild as opposed to Tears of the Kingdom. And I came up with a few logical deductions. And this is going to be getting into the stuff that is the primary reason why I didn't make a video. And it's because it's not stuff that happens on screen. It's something that I've taken something you see in the game, and I'm trying to like work my way backwards and unwind the loop essentially. So there's a disclaimer for that. The first one would be, what led to a previous trip to the past that we don't know about? Right now, my best speculation, which would also talk about and signal something that the Sheikah did as preparation in the far past, would be the creation of the Shrine of Resurrection. It's led me to wonder if the hero died and that Zelda went into the past to try to undo it, or something like some precipitating set of events happened that caused her to experience time travel. If the prophecy of the calamity is true, say in some particular version of this timeline where the hero is defeated, the darkness of the calamity should engulf the world, and maybe it did. And maybe through that series of events, it led to Zelda ending up in the past by still acquiring a secret stone, perhaps, or something to that effect, right? There's also something else in the present that's really, really fascinating too, which is that they found the Sheikah slate buried, and they don't know the origin of it either. And a key point of Zelda's trip to the past that we see on the screen is that Minoru performs key upgrades to the Pure Pad. And I have to wonder if the Sheikah slate came from this previous trip, and that's an explanation for why there's just no documented origin of it. I want to say when you first go to meet up with Pyrrha in the Heteno Tech Lab, it's even mentioned that it surprised her. I think to extrapolate further here, say that this did really happen, the hero died, and Zelda went to the past and just became stuck. What would a Zelda in the past do? My best guess here would be that she would do everything in her power to prepare everyone for the future. Sonya picks up on this in the cutscenes and mentions that she guesses that Zelda would want to stay and help them with the problems in their time without a hero to send the Master Sword to the past. I would say that it's at least decently likely that there's never a catalyst event that causes her to draconify, which would be why we hadn't seen or heard anything about that going into Breath of the Wild and throughout Breath of the Wild. Now, it is always possible that the Light Dragon was up above the mythical club barrier and just nobody could see her. Always possible. I don't think so, though. So without the catalyst event and her never draconifying, it gets to this place of like, okay, so what would she be doing helping people out in the past? Possibly and probably trying to find the Sheikah. I mean, that's what I would do if I was her. If the Sheikah existed at this point and, say perhaps they aren't the interlopers after all and they didn't get sealed in the Twilight Realm or something, or some piece of or parlor group didn't, I would say I would go find them if I was her. And then there's also other stuff too here, which is we know she must have gone to the past at least once before, because there's a whole series of events that can't happen without her going to the past. And what I'm referring to is the memories that we see in Tears of the Kingdom. So we're just going to run through these and talk about them and what history may have looked like in the absence of Aunt Zelda going to the past, because there has to be an initial flow of time here, right? And even if it was her ancestor that took part in this, it's not going to play out the same. For example, if it was her ancestor, she's not going to go to the past and receive upgrades on the Pyrrha Pad, because there's probably going to be a Pyrrha Pad in the initial flow of time. It's at least possible that the Gerudo Assault still happens. If you think about this in history, let's say that original founding is right, and it seems like it's probably right. Raru's kingdom is being the original founding, I mean. But in the span of about 400 years there, based on the ages of Twinrova in Ocarina of Time and in the past Echusa Kingdom, at some point there should be some event that causes the Hyrulean War for unification. Or as I think it's localized in English as like the Hyrulean Civil War. So something has got to precipitate that. And I wonder if the Guru assaults were, I wonder if there's something about that that was like a precipitating event for the war for unification. And we're going to come back to that. I think Show of Fealty plays out the same no matter what, because it's like Ganon's MO to basically be like, I'm your best friend, and then murder you. The Zelda and Sonu conversation never happens, which means that Sonia and Rauru would never learn about Link as it relates to some event in the far future. Rauru even says, Link, that is not a name I've ever heard. So we know that there can't be another Link at that point unless like he's just lying his ass off, which I don't see why. That would be really convoluted for no reason plot-wise. The Chamberlain's diary entries don't exist at all without a Zelda. The Sonia being caught by treachery, without a Zelda, Ganon's going to need to impersonate somebody. There's actually something super interesting about this particular memory, which is that when the puppet Zelda fades, it releases a groan. And that groan is not like Ganondorf, who is on the terrace with them. That groan and that voice is Mummydorf's groan. I'm gonna play this audio for you so you can hear it. So, referred to the Mummydorf's groan, that means that somehow Mummydorf has followed Zelda into the past in some way. And keep in mind, based on the timing of events, the Master Sword has not actually been sent back in time yet. That actually happens towards the end of her trip to the past, before she Tricronifies. And the reason I bring up the Master Sword is because, in my pursuit of trying to explain this, one of the things that occurred to me is that, essentially, when Link goes to the Temple of Time, he's going through he has Gloom Corruption, and the Master Sword is shattered and is also corrupted by Gloom, and they're essentially mailing a Gloom-corrupted sword to the past. And if this had happened earlier, I think this would have been my explanation for why we hear a Mummydorf groan whenever the Phantom Zelda disappears. But without it, it's really, really hard to even make the case for that. In the case of the Birth of the Demon King memory, it's always possible that this still happened, and that they are. Ganon we see in Macarena is just like a manifestation of this other Ganon that sealed him to the castle. I would also pose that perhaps originally the Birth of the Demon King that happens in Ocarina of Time actually still happened there, but Zelda traveling into the past may have acted as like a temporal anchor and caused these events to move backwards in time. And so I wonder about the Birth of the Demon King there. I'm thinking that may not happen yet. And the reason why is because if you think about what happens with the sages there, it is a unifying event for the different groups across the Young Kingdom. You have a Gerudo sage, you have a Zora sage, Goron, Rito, all that. If they were getting ready to ramp up in history towards a war of unification under a collected banner of the Hyrulean royal family, I think that this is a sign, perhaps, that her traveling to the past may have caused the unification of the kingdom beforehand, potentially anyway. And then, of course, if you don't have a Birth of the Demon King at this point, do you still have a Sage's Vow? Probably not. Again, it could have still happened, so maybe. The King's Duty, without a Zelda there. Let's say that the Birth of the Demon King does happen, right? Without a Zelda there to tell them, like, you're about to get your ass beat. You know, that conversation doesn't even happen. Neither does the Remember the Name speech, where Ganon is told of Link's name. The Master Sword in Time, of course, is not even happening, because the Master Sword is present throughout Breath of the Wild. And then Zelda doesn't Draconify because there's no Master Sword, so logically, I think that's what that looks like in her absence. And I don't think that the revelation of perhaps Zelda pulling events back in the past stops with the Birth of the Demon King. The Imprisoning War, which is told in the backstory of A Link to the Past primarily, is placed on the timeline before A Link to the Past. And now we're seeing that the story of the Imprisoning War is happening after founding. This is really, really interesting because, and there's been a lot of debate in the Zelda community about this, and you have some people saying that there's 2 imprisoning wars, etc., and I'm not into that. If you think about this, like one of those things that Nintendo has done with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they have intentionally built the games in such a way that they're more shareable online to generate discussions. They're more vague about certain things in order to generate discussions and debates. So naming the 2 historical events the same thing is really fucking confusing. And I don't see them doing that. We already have enough problems with the whole, like, Great Calamity of 10,000 years ago, referring to other past potential calamities and, like, which one is which. I don't foresee them going that route. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Let's say for a minute that this is right and that her going to the past acts as a temporal anchor that pulls events backwards in time and allows them to happen earlier. This is a key tenet of time travel consequences of time travel kind of a thing, and it's well documented amongst theories of time travel and ideas of time travel. And I'm sure that if this were true, could be the basis of why they chose to do this. So you have a Zelda traveling in the past acting as a temporal anchor, causing the birth of the Demon King to happen earlier, causing the history of the Zonai to not be lost and end up in the far future, a group that we have never heard of before now, though they are definitely hidden throughout all the other games, and that's an iceberg unto itself. You have the Imprising War now happening closer to founding as well. It feels like a lot of coincidences to be just a bunch of coincidences. I think that there are consequences also to her going into the past and causing these other events to happen earlier, having the Master Sword with her, sealing Ganon earlier, and I potentially wonder if this is the point, if this creates a vacuum that causes the actual events of Four Swords, or the Minish Cap Four Swords, and the rise of Vati and the Fourth Sword and whatnot. Because objectively, those games have always been the most contentious with their placements on the timeline. Minish Cap, not so much, but Four Swords, for sure. And just due to the fact that there's a lot of things that have kind of feels weird for them to be happening at Ocarina of Time. It's also a lot of things happening in a very short span of time in the history of the world that seemingly nobody remembers, although that's like not a really good debate point because the Hylians forget all fairly often, seems to be their trademark. I think this could explain a potential vacuum or void in the timeline where like Minish Cap and Four Swords can sit really cleanly as a separate part of a continuum, a separate fork in the timeline caused by Zelda going to the past. And I wonder if this is the precipitating events that leads to the hero's defeat in the Downfall timeline branch. And the reason I say this is because prior to Zelda traveling to the past, it's really hard to understand the concept of the hero's defeat. It's because like we're not shown this on screen, and supposedly, allegedly, it's an outcome of Ocarina of Time. I do maintain very strongly, I think that the hero's defeat is an in-universe explanation for what Sahasrahim and the maidens are experiencing and seeing in A Link to the Past. Like they think that the prophecy may have come true potentially because of the Dark World, and why not? But then if you consider this idea that Zelda may have traveled to the past a time before because of a hero's defeat in the far future, but what if she shares this information and it becomes a rumor that continues to propagate throughout time? I wonder this, and you can probably sense why I didn't feel like the evidence was strong enough for like a video, but I wonder about this a little bit because that could be an explanation for the hero's defeat that would allow A Link to the Past to be severed from Ocarina of Time in such a way that it doesn't break the canon, potentially. I think even in this kind of a model, in the far, far future of Adventure of Link in the Downfall branch, you have towns named for sages, is what it's called. And one of the things that I discovered after I've been combing through the Japanese version of Encyclopedia, I found quite a bunch of things in there, and I'm actually working on an episode for that. And there's a lot of really good lore in there that I don't understand why it was taken away during English localization. And when I say a lot of good lore, I mean like seriously, it's like some juicy shit. One of the things that you find out in the Towns Named for Sages paragraphs in the Japanese copy of Encyclopedia about Adventure of Link is they talk about everything. They talk about how Mido was not actually a sage, and they say like the unseen sage Kasuto. And then one of the comments that they make about it is speculating about this unseen era, air quotes. They keep mentioning there's a couple of instances of this in the Downfall timeline, and it's in books, a couple places in the books, like the Goddess Collection books as well, where they're talking about these unseen events that happen before A Link to the Past prospectively. And I wonder if this is it, and I wonder if it is caused by time travel. But how do we get here to start with? The most like tinfoil hat like thing that I can come up with is that originally Breath of the Wild happens at the end of one of the other timelines, and that when Zelda goes to the past, it causes a complete subvergence of the fork in Ocarina of Time and creates a different continuum. And this could be a reason why we see a lot of different types of references in Breath of the Wild that changed going into Tears of the Kingdom. I think it's something that's worth considering and wondering about. But again, ultimately, this didn't end up baking into a video because it's not really provable. It's just a giant hunch based on an analysis of hundreds of pieces of information on my part. my instincts tell me that even if I'm not right, I'm probably on the right track with it. And keep looking, and then if something turns up or there's ever official confirmation or something happens in Age of Imprisonment that gives further evidence, then absolutely I will revisit this 100%. But that tangent gone. The thing about the town's name for sages that is important is if it was severed from Ocarina of Time, like how do you still have these towns that are named for sages in the future, right? And we have raw resettlement and places like that in the wilds that are kind of like close to the castle, and I can kind of get my head behind it. I'm not quite ready to commit to a single branch yet, but so this is mostly just me thinking aloud. One thing that has gotten me about the Zora history and the monuments are the examinations of Ruto. And one of the things that it says is that Ruto, the hero, the princess helped Ruto to like drive out evil or whatever. And the depiction of the scene is that their bodies floating down the river. Presumably, this is the Zora River. And what's really weird about that is for that to happen, it can't have happened until after the events of Ocarina of Time. And the reason why is because until the very end of the game almost, Zelda is still presenting as Sheik. And it explicitly says the princess and the hero. And you gotta remember, like, the identity of Sheik was not actually known until very, very late in Ocarina of Time. So, in my mind, what this history is describing is actually something that happens after. But what's really confusing is if it happened after, why is Ganon still, like, wreaking havoc, right? And causing problems against the domain? Something has happened in the past that we have not seen. And I keep thinking that we're getting ready to see the unveiling of, like, whatever the hero's defeat is, potentially, or some precipitating events for it, or some implications that time travel may have caused that, or that it's a rumor or something like that. Again, as with any Zelda game, this Age of Imprisonment will probably answer one question and introduce 14 more. I'm kind of hoping to get a little bit more concrete answers, but I wonder. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed taking a quick look through this and maybe me getting to talk more on the speculative side of my own thinking and theory crafting. If you enjoyed this or you have any questions or comments or anything else, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you, always. Until the next time, my friends.